I'm Dan McGrath, and this is Pilot After 50, the series where I'm going to share some of my perspectives on becoming a private pilot after the age of 50. When I was a teenager, I had a very good older friend who was a private pilot. Hilton was something of a wild man who loved speed, fast cars, motorcycles, and airplanes. A casual acquaintance would probably never guess it because he was humble, but Hilton was also a genius. He was a computer engineer who worked on defense computers, but it was Hilton who first introduced me to general aviation. He owned a Beechcraft Sierra at the time. It was a single-prop, complex airplane with a notably roomy cabin that could theoretically at least seat 6. My first ever flight in anything was in Hilton's Beechcraft. I had grown up poor enough that the notion of air travel of any kind seemed out of reach, something just for the rich. But flying with Hilton brought the impossible into the realm of reality, and even though he scared the crap out of me by performing unannounced stalls, I caught the aviation bug. I thought it was a weird perk for a computer manufacturer, but for reasons I'll never know, Hilton's employer offered ground school for aspiring pilots, and he said he could get me in at no charge to myself if I wanted to pursue a private pilot's license. I was only 15 or 16 at the time, and I didn't even have my driver's license yet, but Hilton offered to let me use his airplane for training, too. The opportunity and potential savings were enormous, but did I mention I was a teenager? I attended one rather tedious lesson at ground school, which took place on Wednesdays. At the time, I was a pretty regular attendee of a youth group. There was like a weekly rock concert, and it was well attended by pretty girls. That also took place on Wednesdays. Anyway, I didn't make it through ground school, and Hilton is no longer with us. But still, I always said, I'll get back to it someday. Then, at the age of 50, I was working a part-time job as a chauffeur, and while I was waiting on a client at the FBO of a small suburban Class Delta airport, I saw a little red Piper Cub taxi up onto the ramp. The pilot shut down the engine and began cleaning up his plane. As I watched him gingerly climb out of his plane, my jaw dropped open. He was a rail-thin old man. I mean, old. Okay, he didn't look like that. Maybe more like this. Like almost certainly one of the few remaining World War II veterans. I guessed he was between 90 and 100 years old and still flying by himself. Something clicked in my head. It had been 34 years since I'd blown my first opportunity to become a pilot. I was still saying someday, but time wasn't marching on anymore, it was sprinting. And I realized at that moment, if I'm going to fly airplanes, someday had better be today. I was calling schools that very evening, and I was flying with my first instructor inside of a week. I bought a ground school course by Jeppesen that my flight school was using at the time. It was a stack of books, and all the classes were entirely automated and online. That was only about $400 to get started. The private pilots are required to take at least 35 hours of ground school. I probably spent double that time studying and testing, but I never failed a quiz, and even though I found Jeppesen's course to be rather error-prone, it was still good enough that I passed my FAA written exam on the first try. Student pilots need a minimum of 35 or 40 hours flying, depending on the type of curriculum, but I'd read that the average number of actual hours before a check ride was more like 60. So I was told to expect a total expense in the neighborhood of $18,000 by the time I passed my check ride. Well, individual experiences may vary, and mine varied from that figure a lot. About double, in fact. For all my dual instruction time, ground instruction time, and solo time leading up to the check ride, I paid in the neighborhood of $36,000. I can still light my grill just by touching my credit card to the charcoal. I had logged about 100 hours before I finally took my check ride, which was another $800 expense, but I also passed that on my first attempt. Thank God, because I couldn't have afforded to do it again. Honestly, if I could go back to the beginning and start over, I would definitely have done it differently. I'm going to get into this more in future episodes, but one of my big complaints about the pilot training world is that instructors generally aren't trying to be instructors. They're trying to become airline pilots. To become an airline pilot, the FAA requires 1,500 flight hours logged. That would take a ton of time and money, over $300,000 if you're renting an airplane and then paying for fuel, unless you spend some time as a flight instructor, because then you can get paid to log those hours. Even sitting in the right seat and not touching the controls counts towards the 1,500 hours. So flight instructors who want to be airline pilots get their students to pay their way to the airlines. And as soon as an instructor gets his 1,500 hours, they gone. I didn't know this going in, but it bit me in the ass a few times because I was trying to pay for my lessons out of my weekly paychecks. Lessons averaged $400 for 1 hour of dual instruction in the air and 1 hour on the ground. With my budget, that meant I could only afford to fly about once a week, 2 times a week every once in a while. There are big disadvantages to approaching flight lessons slowly. The biggest problem is that you lose some of what you learn with long gaps between lessons, so you waste time relearning what you were taught last week. But if the last lesson was only a couple days ago, it's easier to recall. So I wasted a lot of time and money covering the same ground over again. The other thing is instructor turnover. The conventional wisdom is that an instructor change will add 5 hours to your overall training time. That might not sound like a lot, but in my case at least, one instructor change would have meant 5 more weeks and another $2,000 expense. But I ended up with like 5 instructor changes over the whole course of my training, so I figured that wasted $10,000 and ended up taking me 6 more months to get to my check ride. So the longer you stretch out your lessons, the more instructor changes you're probably going to have to adapt to, the more time and money it's going to cost you in the long run. I also had some additional setbacks due to weather. The last winter I was taking lessons, I was grounded for 2 straight months because of continual low cloud cover. A pilot's skills are perishable. It's not like riding a bicycle. You need to keep in practice. So I had to spend some time rehoning my edge when the sky finally opened back up. So don't take your time. If you're going to go after a pilot's license, time is of the essence. Yeah, I eventually earned my certificate doing it the slow way, but it took almost 2 years and cost double what it might have if I had just done it faster. Can you teach an old dog new tricks? Being over 50, I was worried that my brain's neuroplasticity might not be what it once was, and while I'd say that might have been something of a factor, I think it actually had a relatively minor impact on how fast I could learn to fly. The biggest factor was simply that I wasn't flying often enough to efficiently cement my lessons. Retention of my ground school lessons that I was able to work on daily was quite good. I absolutely crushed the oral portion of my practical test. So if I could do it all again, I'd save up or borrow enough money to pay for around 50 hours of instruction and solo time, make sure I had ample time to take the lessons. Before or after work is entirely doable because it only takes about 2 hours of your time. If the airport's not far away, it's not much of a drive, no big deal. But I'd try to get it all done in 3 to 4 months, tops. Take into consideration your local weather patterns before you pick a start date, too. Don't get grounded for 2 months like I did. Plan your lessons during a 3 to 4 month span where you expect good weather. And keep in mind that what most people consider good weather isn't necessarily what would be good weather for flying. Good flying weather could be 20 degrees and breezy, for example. Visibility is the key. High clouds or no clouds with winds that are well under 20 knots is what a student pilot wants to see. The slow and unplanned way I went about my flight training ultimately worked, and I'm psyched to have a private pilot certificate, but I wish there had been someone to pull me aside and show me a better way to go about it from the beginning. I'm not done yet. I still want to earn some more ratings and endorsements for complex and high-performance airplanes. I want to learn how to fly under instrument-only conditions. But for now, while my credit card cools, I'm having a lot of fun with the freedom to fly and a newly minted license to learn. Thanks for checking out Pilot After 50. Please subscribe, and if you liked this video, hit the thumbs up. If you didn't like it so much, let me know why in the comments, and I'll try to do better next time. For more on what I get up to, check out danmcgrath.net. Thanks for stopping by.